Yak aya yaksatini takat yuhan aten kunal chish achiniji ne yaha yukatangi datyanaksa khatutletsi ye awecha achtlektein akawe atataya yutakutang wasat kulkwane adusa ya hatachkankiyan hastu ide haskachtutlatu yaha yukatangi chitlay aya Eka adati techotank achtu yuk chosatin hayuchatangidat yen yinak iltekat yuhan aka achtu yuk ya yagi geng tikte ni jagachtu ne hatuasagu yinde gachtutsu ya haachai aka kone eka kekwashid ya hayagu ye awa achtuasagu Konachawe yichinach kawadayi aya hayuchatangi. Yechwaji yekwati. Ya kedain aya at gachtisa ach. Ni kedain aya kagachtu ach. At gachtu la yechi. Ya hayuchatangi. Aka awe. Ya ade. Woosh de. Katujel. Ya hayuchatangi. Hatu de. Gachtu de ti. Ye awa wan qanins chu o ya khosatin akhu awe ku has ausaku ade qis ye we qewu an aya aditsa qewu at yat ayakh awe gol hatun de tani tu wan qanins kautle hits aya we tik kisani wan qanins qoa kagachtu aq kagachtu qeyi ya qatuwuk sa qeyihin yidu saga at wishkachnik tin qnakhay hasudati takhutang qalqawu qekhne kakhon I shakshani ya chakatin aklein has ku qachtlein wasa hasu tuaw sa guun qone ya kukhde ya yantutlaqi ya hayukatangi idat ya nakh ya qeqa aya wan qanins qol thalkadina ya utisatin ya hayijni aqwa tuwa akh shingit aqa qatuwa akhch qnakh lkuzi at awe ganchish kdeneji ne ya yagi we huchi hayijni ya tag ya kejin yagi qanakh wush qanakh gachtu da art achtu asguyi yu qatangi kha akhi sagutin gol kegachtu ich agagachtu sa kekdes qanakh Jan Krach was a good dat Gini, Goshi Gugikt, we had you Getangi, Echenach, Aka, Kheta, Yagachtutlag. Gunchish a Retisa Achi, et the cut you han. You go ayach one, you two yeti, Shetzi, you two Shetzi, Kunach. Yewa, you two I guess go you Hayetani, and get Renach, go.
Yucatang, Atlan, Yucatang. Ka, Shaanáx. Atleen dat Shaanáx ga ach chai ach.
Okay. Okay. Chechne ea ka one kanins tesh kajid ukitch hayukatangi. Kaka kwatiko kaya tiyo. Okay. Okay. Oh, good. Thoughts, questions, reflections? Last recorded speech of the semester. I guess a few highlights. I'm just really thankful that we do this work. I once heard there's an old school thing that people don't do very much anymore where you ask a riddle. I think it was a riddle, but he said, what do you think that is? I'll write it down so we can see it as we think about it. Let's see. So there was a speaker who said this. Dot Shaanáx atutletsin hayukatangi, which I think is a question. But there is these certain kind of riddles that can get asked, where people will ask a question, and either you're supposed to say the right answer or you're not supposed to say anything. You're just supposed to listen to it. I think it needs to be studied a little bit more and probably brought back. But can we interpret this?
Does Shaanáx mean like through, along something?
It looks like it, but it's something a little different.
Wait.
Hadutletsin is making us strong or making our language strong.
Well,
Well, it's got which should have something to do with mouth, shouldn't it?
it does. But it just, in this case, it alters the meaning quite a bit into something that we might not think it usually would.
Well, that would be what? Nach would be through.
We've got Shaanáx.
Hayukatangi is language. Our language. Eventually, we're going to get enough pieces of the puzzle together that we can actually make a picture.
That's pretty close, yeah. I added kin on here because it's the opposite of Shaanáx.
No, because I like to do what you are doing is with our language is giving us strength.
Well, we'll go look up this scene thing because I think strength is a really accurate prediction just based on like the way the language works, the stuff we know about it. It's like, yeah, there's that verb root. Like I could see it. So we'll go to the scene. So here we've got scene, which does have like, I guess I should have 3 meanings there instead of 2. Strong, valued, or weak. And so here we see tlitsin deintich, they're building it solidly. Maybe this wind will get stronger. Wutlitsin, where'd it go? Yukatangi, Their words were powerful. Kashayach atashsin kachwatani weduk. I'm not strong enough to bend the cottonwood. And then we see Kesh Ushtin, which is weak, anemic. Achka Tesh Ushtin. My mother is weak, not strong. And then here's, oops, I gotta fix that. Okay, there's a mistake here. So I went through last summer and changed all of these so that they could be color coded. But here's one where I didn't delete. Like these things will be deleted. So ignore the repeating thing. So object, subject, L, classifier, seen. For the subject to cherish or value the object. So chatishitzin, we cherish it. Chagaishitzin, you all value it. This is your language. And then we've got this, well, I guess chachitzin is expensive. And so here you've got chachitzin way uchganhini, the gas is expensive, right? And so the one we're looking at is this one. And then when you put it in a fourth person, it kind of creates, it means it is cherished, it is valued. So it kind of, you could say people value it, people cherish it. But chaditlitsin ends up with kind of its own interpretation once you add the fourth person. So here you'd say people cherish it. I probably said that's pretty good. So then that leaves us with Shaanáx and Kin, which we'll go find both of those just so that we know them. They are both relational nouns. We'll go look at Shaanáx first.
Oh, is it? What do people value like our language?
Say that
Something
again?
like that. What do people value like our language?
Somewhere in those, yeah. So here's Shaanáx. So it's more than or excessively. But I would say a really good sort of place, like I kind of like to find just like these very short interpretations. So more than, and what's the opposite of more than?
Less than.
Less than, right? So that's what these are. So now, when you say dat Shaanáx, this is how you would do things like this. This is where you say, what is more? Right? So, for example, I could say, dat Shaanáx, dat Shaanáx, Shadash, we douche. That's a question. What is that asking? Do we know Shadash? I guess that's a big question.
I don't know. No, what is more valuable something than that cat? No, I don't know what it's doing.
No, I'm not asking you to value your cat.
Okay.
We went to a different place. So let me show you the Dutch verb real fast. We'll go look it up. So here is dash, and we've got 0 classifiers for something non-living to be heavy, L classifier for something alive to be heavy. So if shadash is for a living thing to be heavy, dat Shaanáx shadash we douche. What is that asking? What's heavier than your cat? What's heavier than that cat?
Oh, heavier. Okay.
Right, oops. And so you can also use this in statements. So you could say, we douche Shaanáx shadash we cake. Which isn't always the case.
That cat is heavier than that dog.
Close.
That dog is heavier than that cat.
That's right. So Shaanáx is the more than, right? So this is, you could say, I'm not saying this is true, but you could say something like this. Ach Shaanáx hishitzin. What's that saying?
I'm stronger than you, or you're stronger.
Close. Yes.
Okay.
So we've got to watch the word order, right? So whatever the Shaanáx is coming, it's more than the thing we just said. So you are stronger than me. And then I'd say Ejunitin, which is in your dreams. Get a little flash talk after that. Okay. So coming back, this is a riddle. What is it riddling?
It's
What is
asking
more
who
valuable
who's
than our
stronger
language?
than the language.
It's a question, yes. What is more valuable than our language? And when that speaker said this, he just rolled in right into his next thought. He didn't expect us to answer. Tlingit does have riddles like this, where it's sort of saying, the answer is, of course, nothing. This is another way of
Yeah.
saying it's nothing more valuable than our language. And so it was really interesting. I thought I was sharing that when I was talking to you folks earlier. And then just saying, we are in this balancing act of listening to the language, speaking the language, and learning its structure. And it's really tough to do when we have 4 hours per week for 15, 16 weeks, which it adds up, but it's also just a tiny sliver of your life. And some of you are really doing a lot of work outside of the class, which is really necessary. And there is probably a future where there's a whole lot more activity in between classes. So we're really trying to figure out how to do that, how to build a critical mass of teachers so that we can have, ideally there's a language program that it's like a 1 year of college, but the first year you don't do anything but Tlingit, and you do it like 6 hours a day. And so that we would do beginning and intermediate all in 1 year. Then you would just roll right into advanced Tlingit. And so there is probably a future where we have something like that, but we got to figure out, we got to probably get one more language teacher here, and then we got to take over a dorm, like just evict all the non-Tlingit learners and just say this is a Tlingit dorm now, which it was John Pugh's idea. So we'll say John Pugh said you got to go, you got to bounce. Well, we're not going to kick anybody out, even though that might happen to Tlingit people on our own land. But we're not trying to do that. But we're trying to create these spaces where our languages exist. And so one of the ideas is to build like an adult immersion center where folks can go and basically live in the language. And you would have long-term residents, then you would have short-term residents, and then you would have people who would just go visit. But the idea is once you cross the threshold, it's all Tlingit. And I think that's going to be a huge shift for us once we can do that. And I think we're getting close to putting an idea like that forward here in Akquan Ani that we hope can be replicated in other places. And we have folks who are talking about these moving camps and these other really cool ideas. Because we've got to build a critical mass of folks who can really just speak and understand the language. Like these classes are great, but it's always a bit of a balancing act between like there's so much stuff to cover about the language, which is what we're going to try and do tonight, to go through some stuff and really try to unlock some objects and subjects, look at the perfective, look at the future, and then give you a whole bunch of slides to go practice. And I got to finish some chapters in there's these books I was working on how to teach advanced Tlingit, which they've never gotten done, but I'll show you the drafts of them, and I'll put them all on our class website so you got a bunch of stuff to study. Finish your letter first. Get your letter ready. We're getting together on Tuesday. I'm not going to record it. It won't be posted. You'll read your letters. We'll just listen to each other, talk for a little bit, reflect, and then those who are here on Akquan Ani, if you want to go out to join the other class, we're going to Hinde Haskakwa. They're going to go into the water. Go for it. But then we'll be on break for a month. But I'll explore some solutions on how we can get together. There's folks on the Discord. There's folks doing different things. We can certainly set up regular. The Zoom link, this Zoom link is always open. And there's a study Zoom link as well, which is always open. So you guys can always set up times to just use those links and just get together. Any thoughts or questions before we move on.
I wonder with the idea of like a dorm, if you even started with like a floor of a dorm,
Yeah.
not the whole thing, or a wing. I haven't been in the dorms, a wing of a floor of a dorm.
Yeah, right. And so the idea was like as this new dorm was being built, which is pretty big, like that might open up the possibility of a housing. And yeah, maybe it starts small, or maybe it's like what we're trying to encourage the powers that be to do is to pool their money and to just buy a big house. And in Juneau, that's no small sum of money, but just have a private residence that's and it has a nice big open space that's ideally a lot of stuff can be accessed on the first floor because some of our existing birth speakers aren't going to be doing stairs. We don't want them going up and down stairs. So ideally there'd be some bedrooms and facilities and stuff all on the ground floor, and then you could reserve those for visiting elders and stuff. And so I think we're getting close to selling the idea, and I think it's something that can happen. But we got to get folks behind it and just say like,
Well, and if you look at how much people are paying for room and board every semester, and you get, 10 people, and I have no idea what UAS charges for a dorm room, but you put that towards the mortgage.
yeah,
I'm guessing it's not going to be cheap what they charge for the dorm rooms.
yeah, and ideally, like this is a funded program, so if we get folks who sign, as long as they sign up and they commit to doing the thing and spending the right amount of hours, like we should just house them and probably just pay them, right? Like that should be something that's funded. So those are things that are going to be explored. So we'll figure out some things. Okay, anything else? Okay, so this, whoops, I guess I closed it. Hold on. Reopen. This slideshow has gone through a bunch of different versions. I showed this to the advanced class last night, and then I got excited and stayed up till 2 in the morning trying to make some revisions to it. So thinking about how to start putting some of these pieces together before we go to our break. We start with objects and subjects and how they form and what they look like. And I think doing this kind of stuff is important, but then I'll put this whole slideshow up. What am I doing? Thumbs down? Did I just do thumbs down? Okay. I'll put this whole slideshow up, and you should repeat all of these. Just keep going through this thing, because the way it's set up is you're able to sort of guess what's coming. And so it'll be a PDF, and you could just go one page at a time and just challenge yourself to like really master these. And I think it starts with memorization, and then it moves over to just internalizing the structure of the language, which we start with this. So is there anything on this thing that you don't understand?
I'm not entirely clear on the chush and the whoosh and the whoosh, but I'm
Okay.
guessing that's because it's kind of more advanced than we've gotten to yet.
Well, we haven't done a
Also
whole,
the shh.
yeah, so these will pop up in a certain spot. So chush and whoosh, which can be wooch, if they pop up right before the verb, then this is, and it could also be, sometimes you'll have like chush to, which can contract to shtu, like if you say shtu chash tu. So when you say shtu chash tu, like I'm studying, right? Like, so we've probably said that, right? So what we have, shtu chash tu. Right, so that's what we have. So we can say, okay, here's the cha, I get that. There's also this invisible object out here. There's an L classifier, and then there's two, which is like reading, counting, learning, or studying. Well, I guess teaching. Let's say reading, counting, teaching. It's all of those things. So what are the first parts? This SH and this two part. What are those things?
Three verbs or
Reverb. It's SH.
Yeah, well, what do they mean? Like chush. Chush and this SH are the same thing. So SH is a contraction of chush.
Those are self reflexives.
Self,
It's
or
to
like
inside.
you could say like one's own. Inside, right? And then if you have, so you have chashtu, but if you have chashetu, which would usually be yi chashetu. Anybody recognize that?
You are all studying
well,
together.
now it happened. I know that. So it resides inside you or no? Hasla, oh hasla too. Oh.
I am teaching it.
Reading
I'm teaching it to
Ah.
you.
Is that the minus I version?
Two.
As it's happening right now. It's not a completed thing. So I could say ye eat chashetu. I taught you all, right? So chashetu is teaching. I am teaching. Shtichashtu. I am teaching it inside of myself. That's kind of how you say studying, right? So chush is to the self. So when you have chush or the SH version right here, that means doing something to the self, right? Like shchwadzitin, I see myself. Or chush shtuchashtu, shtuchdanuk, I feel it inside my own self. It's usually talking about like an emotion. So with chush and then whoosh means to each other. So there's a difference here on how these ones work. So you can say wooch in to, which is different than wooch to decha. So what is wooch in to cha?
Eat together?
We're eating it together. We are eating it together. So there's like a pizza, there's some kind of thing where a dinner, right? That's nice. But what would wooch to decha be?
We're eating each other.
they're
We're
eating
eating
each
each
other.
other. So that's, now it's gotten very bad. Right? And so there's a difference between wooch in and wooch, right? So wooch in, we went over this in just the other day. So wooch in is being together. And then if you add a verb, it means doing that verb together. Wuchin gantuat, we're walking together, right? And so there's all kinds of things that wuchin works well for. Wuchin yechikachtune. We are, wuchin yechikachtune would be, let's do that, those two. Wuch in yechikachtune, as opposed to wuch yechikachtune. What are the differences between these?
We're gonna work together versus like we're working on each other.
Yeah, we're gonna work together. We're gonna work on each other, right? Like maybe we're therapists that are just have lots of problems. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna work on you're gonna work on I'll work on your issues. You work on my issues, or whatever the thing is, right? But that's just demonstrating that whoosh and wooching are different. But if you see this little plus D thing, that means that either one of those, if they pop up right before the verb, they will push the verb to go plus D if it's not already. So that's why the classifier has that plus D thing. It says doing that to yourself, that's a plus, that's got to be a plus D thing. Doing it to each other, that's got to be a plus D thing. So a lot of verbs, when you hear like whoosh, you should be hearing the plus D there, like whoosh kanach gach to da art. We're going to gather together. Right, so that one's, it's built into that. It's just built into a number of things that you'll start to become more familiar with. Anything else that you're not sure
So it
Well,
looks like all of those preverbs only happen in the third person.
Only, well, just Hus. You can shush and
Ah,
boost with whatever. But that's why Hus
okay.
has this little arrow, because Hus only affects the third person.
so why were you using, I may be tired, but it's whoosh here, but in all your examples you were writing it was whooch, like W-O-C-H?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I guess I'm more of a whoosh person.
Same
This,
thing, but just interpretation or yeah.
so I would say whoosh in, and I would say whoosh tin. So what do you think the guideline is here?
Whether the following word is open or closed.
You've
Yeah,
got
Yes.
like you've
Starts
got
with
a
a consonant
strong
or a vowel.
consonant. You have a strong consonant in whooch in or whoosh tin. But if it was the other way, if you said whooch tin, you'd have strong consonant, back
yeah.
to back.
Mhm.
Usually you're going to end up with whoosh if there's a consonant coming, and then whooch if there's a vowel coming.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think it's like one of those hard and fast rules, but I think that that's just typically what you're going to have. So yeah, this should say both, but I think in the interest of space, I got a different one that has, I think, both of them on. Anything else that we're not sure about on here?
What about other verbs that use the sh, like shkash, and stuff like that? Is it also acting on the self in those verbs?
Yeah. So there's there's ones that we could probably think of that have that maybe we've learned, like so you'd say kashanik. So these are third person, and shkashnik. So these are ones where like the sh, which this is to the self. And so I think there's two ways to interpret the second verb. Oops, sorry, this should be aklanik. So aklanik and shkashnik. These are slightly different. Does anybody know how they're different or how to interpret either of these?
Is SH a squished version of whoosh?
Chush. Whoosh won't contract. Whoosh and whoosh won't contract. Chush can change to just sh. So this top one is they are telling the story of it. So there's some story. They're telling me about Duktuk. They're telling me the story of the Duckloidy migration. They're telling whatever it is, there's some specific story. This one is almost always they are telling stories. It could technically be they're telling me their life history. But I think you would end up saying that differently. I think you would say, "Dekusi datawe chanakauchanik." I think so. This one is pretty much always they are telling stories, but that's a case where the sh, it's there, but it's not doing the thing that we expect, where it's like, oh, they're sitting there telling themselves a story. No, it just means they're telling stories. There is this kind of unusual construction where you're going to have some sort of verb root here. And what you have is you're going to have shkadli, and then this means to pretend to verb. So the most probably well-known one is shkadli, which anybody know what that translates to?
Lie.
Yeah, it should be shkadli.
Is
They
that like
lie.
pretending to be Raven?
They told lies. The literal interpretation of this is they pretended to Raven.
They pretended to read it.
And so it is, Raven is a really interesting verb root because it usually means to, I think it has three main interpretations. To act like you know what you're doing when you don't know what you're doing, to lie, or to cheat. So that just tells you a lot about Raven qualities. So the other thing that's on here, so like this is your list of pronouns to choose from though. So like khat, ha, yi, zero or ka or k, at, and sh. And then these are your subjects to choose from. There's fewer subjects, kha, tu, zero, always zero, and du. So the thing to keep in mind about du, the fourth person, someone, or just to say it happens, like adutlitzin, it will make all non-zero classifiers have to always be plus D. And all zero classifiers always have to be minus D whenever the fourth person is there. And we'll see how that works. Okay. Let's get into our prediction mode. So there's little hints all over these slides to help us out. So on the left, we have the theme. What are the things that this theme is showing us? Somebody give us some things going left to right.
Is that entire chunk of things the theme?
This whole thing right here is I would say this is the theme right here. This is the definition.
Object, subject,
There's an
S classifier,
subject, there's an S classifier,
There's a
root,
that says khun.
and
Yeah.
khan, a verb root that will not change. This will be short and high all the time, which is kind of nice because then we don't have to think about stem variation. We just kind of deal with it. So this won't change. This will be here through this. We're going to do a whole bunch of combinations here. This will stay up here so we can look at it. But once we like do this stuff enough, we'll actually, once we look at this verb, we're like, okay, I could change those objects and subjects however I want, because it's going to cause, they're going to run together in certain ways. But we're going to like start looking at how that happens. On the top right, there's a little bit more information. So this says, we're looking at this in the imperfective. So the answers are given to us. There will be an object, there will be a subject, the classifier will be si, all the way down until we get to the fourth person. And it will be khan. So it's going to end with sikhan every single time.
Does imperfective mean it already happened?
No, it means it is happening, but it's not completed.
Okay, so it's just going.
Yeah. So, and this is also a state verb. So for the imperfective of a state, all you need to know is like, it is that way. It is that way. Okay. So when we say them, that's a singular third person. We'll say them all for a plural third person. And then same with the subject, we'll say they for a singular third person. They all for a plural. So if we think about what do these two things need to be, the object and the subject, in order to say, I love them. Chasechan, right? Everybody say, chasechan.
Chasechan.
Hatachan.
Sakhan,
Chasechan.
Chasechan.
Hatachan.
Sakhan,
This verb does not work very well for inanimate objects, like pizza or a lamp or whatever, right? It's usually living things. I love them all.
Hatachan.
Yeah, well,
If you try to make it pizza, would you just say you're standing beside the pizza?
it would just sound, whenever we tried like, I love pizza, like they would just say, the elders that I worked with, they'd say, ach tu asaku. They would just say, I like it, or I want it. But this comes, we were talking about this last night in class. If you want to say like nice shirt, if you want to say I like pizza, if you want to say thing, like, I think generally speaking, Tlingit does not communicate those things. You would just say,
If you
your shirt is nice. Pizza is yummy. You would instead talk about a quality of the thing instead of how you think about it.
if you wanted to express like some sort of extreme level of likeness to an inanimate object, could you use something like nooch, like oh, I love this all the time, and something I like this all the time?
Well, you can use, so nooch is yes, but there's also this habitual form. You would be like, I always love this person or this dog or this cat. It's a living thing. So, someone asked for a phrase today, but sometimes you can just, there's different ways you can do it. So to sort of really show emphasis on things, what you would be talking about is you could say "gachsachanch," which is I always love them. But this is saying, like, if someone said that, I would be like, oh, they like through the good times and the bad times or whatever. Like, it's probably an eternal love. But there's different way, like that's not expressing like the amount right now. So then you could say klach chasachan. I very much love them, I guess.
Do you use konach in this case?
Chasachan. I really love them. You could say klach konach chasachan. I really very love them. And then you could say klach wasa chasachan. How very much I love them. And then you could say, this is getting near the top. Klach ayanach chasachan, which is sort of like I love them too much. And then klesh dasa du yanach chasachan. I don't love anybody more than them. So this is kind of climbing that's kind of climbing, I guess, the ladder of ramping it up. But then you could say, like, put something in front of here, like chaklak. But then it's for me saying that I always love them all the time. And if you said that, I would think maybe they're difficult to love. Because why would you have to say, you could just say chesachan. So for me, I would go to these ones more than this, just for like, there's certain verbs where it makes sense. Like I always go to that store, or I always eat this thing, or I always do that. But when you're getting into some of these, it's sort of like, it starts to feel a little funky when you do communicate it that way. But there's other things you could say, like you could say, so these are getting into the amounts, and you could say, chataych kukasachan, which is, I'm quoting Dolly Parton now. I guess you'd have to say you. So I will always love them. And so I guess you could say chataych kukasachan. You can't draw out that vowel. You can draw out the other vowels if you're going to do the Dolly Parton, Whitney Houston song. Okay. Back to the work we're doing. Okay, we did one. Okay. I think somebody said it. I love them all.
Hasachachan.
Everybody say it.
Hasachan.
Hasachachan.
Hasachan.
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 So here's how this is going to work. This is going to be chasachan all the way down, as long as we have I right there. When you see I first, that means cha is going to pop up. If we put a vowel in front of it, it's going to change to just what's going to happen is this letter A is going to get dropped. So that's what happens when we start talking about when you get more than 3 things, because look at here, 1, that doesn't count. There's, 1, 2. When you get to the root, if you've got 3 things, something's probably going to contract.
I think I know what the next one is.
Oh, let's hear it. Everybody say Ichsachan.
Sechan.
Ichsachan.
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 Sechan.
So this is the vowel that has to go. You can't take that letter I out of the classifier because it means something. You can't take, this is only a vowel. You can't take a vowel out because then you've got nothing. So that means this is going to go. And this is going to be the pattern. So if we change I to ye, the rest of it's going to sound the same. I love y'all.
Yichsechan.
Oh, what? And everybody says Yichsechan.
Ichsachan.
Yichsachan.
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 Step 1 for going to the 4th person object is you pick k. That's the 4th person object. But if there's there's no loving weather. But if there's a weather verb, like for example, kuyati, that does mean you could say ye kuyati or ye kuwati. That could be interpreted as that's how people are. But every speaker you talk to would probably say that's how the weather is. So if there's a weather verb for that, you switch it to ka. Or if there's a k on the verb already, then you'll switch it to ka, because there's a different k. We'll learn about it later. So if it's going to be k, how would I say I love people?
Ichsachan.
Kuchsachan.
Ichsachan.
Sechan.
Passakan.
Kuchsachan.
Ichsachan.
Kusachan.
I love something.
Ooh.
Didn't you just tell us we can't use this for that?
Well, okay. There's an additional one on here that I didn't put on because you sound. Which one did I skip?
Okay.
I love me.
Yes. Okay, we'll put it on the notes, but I'm not putting it on the slideshow because I'll get in trouble.
Ichsachan.
It's not going to be chad. Now we've got
Chasechan.
that reflexive thing we've never really used before.
Oh, it's just.
So that would turn it into a sh, wouldn't it?
Chasechan.
Kach. Ichsachan.
Chasechan.
But this SH changes that, what?
Oh, that's right. It has to be plus D.
Yes.
Chadusechan.
Chadzechan.
Chadze.
Zechan.
Chadzechan.
Shechadzechan.
Don't, like, okay, if you need to, like, look at the mirror and give yourself an affirmation and no one can hear you, go ahead. If you say this in public, people will be like, oh. It's like I'm in love with myself, right? It's not going to sound great.
Like the guy from American Psycho.
I suppose. Oh, okay. I'm not gonna do it. Okay, but I love, and the I love something also doesn't make a lot of sense. It would just mean like I love things. It doesn't make sense, but we'll put it in here just to see what it would look like. Do we remember what the something is?
Passakan.
Adchasachan.
Chasechan.
Chadzechan.
Adchasachan.
Chadzechan.
Chasechan.
What's going to happen when you change it to we?
Chasechan.
Ah.
Cha.
Chadzechan.
Ooh, Tusakan.
Usekhan.
There's no thing.
Tusakan.
Usekhan.
Tusakan.
So, and we also got to make sure in this case we are saying tusakan, not tusakan. What's the difference? Tusakan, tusakan.
It's a different classifier.
Same classifier.
Oh,
Tusakan,
same classifier.
tusakan.
They live
Verb mode.
inside.
Not a pronoun or not a pronoun.
Here's the first one.
Or no.
Tusakan,
It's
Tusakan.
perfective.
Tusakan.
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 It's perfective.
It's TOO. Right?
Perfective.
Yeah.
We are not going to do this.
Wait.
Is it just because the vowel is long, or does it mean something different?
Well, this vowel will stay short, but if we're to write this in the future,
Tusakan. Mm.
okay, we'll go whoosh, because this will push it plus the gach, tus, chen. Oops. But then we would say, we will love them. So one is short and one is long. Any predictions on why that is?
We will love them.
Is somehow the plus D getting like mixed into it?
If that's has something to do with it, yes.
We will love.
Mm.
I.
So this one is a rule. This is not a guideline, this is a rule. For this to, the first person plural subject, it is always short. But if there is no vowel in the classifier, it will go long.
Oh.
Every time, right? So like how would this, how does this work then? So you'd say, ha,
Tusakan.
wa, to, at. We arrived here. But if you were to say, we de gach to at, because there is no vowel in that classifier. There is a vowel in that classifier.
Tuesday. Tusakan. There is a vowel in the classifier.
Tusakan. Tusakan.
Tusakan. But
So
Tusakan.
Tusakan.
t. Yeah, oh what? Oh, it just went blank. We love them all. Sure do.
Has Tusakan.
Has tusakan.
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 Usekhan.
Has tusakan.
Tusakan.
Tusakan. Tusakan.
We love you.
Has Isekhan.
Tusakan.
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 Itusekhan.
Itusakan.
Tusakan.
Itusekhan.
We love you all.
Ye Tusakan.
Tusakan.
Itusekhan.
Yitusakan.
Tusakan.
Yitusakan.
Tusakan.
Tusakan.
We love people.
Tusakan.
Tusakan.
Utusikhan.
Kutusakan.
Tusakan.
Utusikhan.
Vowels there.
Yes, okay, so that's a really good point. 3 vowels. None of these can lose their vowels. Because k, it can't lose, k won't lose its vowel. K's like, I'm not giving up anything. Because I can't just be an underlined K because you couldn't distinguish it from the underlined G that loses its vowel. Or, well, no, it's not that one. And then t will never contract.
Oh, really?
And then the I in the classifier needs to stay there. And so it's a rule. So what the rule is, they call it the 3 strikes and you're out rule. That's what Richard Dowenhauer named it. So if you have 3 things, You have to know those things and see, can any of them drop a vowel? Because one of them should. But if you look at them, they're like, no, we don't drop vowels. Like, okay, just be you
God damn these rules.
then. Okay, let's get to one more. And then we'll
Sounds like a good title for a quick verb book. God damn these rules.
well, okay, yeah. So
These verbs are cool though, you know? They do a lot with very little.
okay, let's get to the last. Okay, we love something. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but just so we can see. Yeah,
Atusechan.
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 So this love word is extremely predictable. Like they start to run into each other, ich sechan, as opposed to chas sechan, but it's all highly predictable, right? And you could just keep going through these lists and just keep practicing this one verb. But then you'll sort of, when you start switching it over to other verbs, you'll see like, okay, you can still do the same thing. But once we start adding a perfective marker and future like future mode and stuff, it'll get a little bit more tricky. Okay, take 5, come back quarter 10. Okay, so now we're going to switch the subject to you. So we did I, this is the pattern. It's going to go I, we, you, y'all, they, them all, people. So we are going to get to the people one. Then we're kind of done with this verb and we'll move on to something else. But the inside scoop is I had gone through and predicted what I thought all of these would be. It's probably 10 years ago. Yeah, it must have been. When I was like writing that book. So I got to this one, I was like, I'll do a whole bunch of object-subject combinations. So you can find the chapter, right? So I went to Cajon Ish, to George Davis, and we were just sat at his table, and I just recorded him saying, just to make sure that what I was predicting was right. And there's a few that I had to adjust, right? But then when it got to, then I did negatives, which is, and so his wife was in the next room, and I said, I don't love you. And she goes, Ishan. So it's really fun. Yeah, so it does go negative after that, but we're not going to get to the negatives yet. Okay. You love them.
Isechan.
Yeah, wow. Isechan.
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 And
You love them all.
Has isechan.
Yeah, wow. Hasesechan.
Isechan.
Hasesechan. You love me.
No.
Isechan.
Isechan.
Here, get this one. I'm just kidding. Hasesechan.
Isechan.
Is this a Jedi mind trick? You love me.
Okay, everybody repeat this one 700 times. I'm just kidding.
Isechan.
Get myself in trouble. I will say, like, when I asked one elder to say this, he was like, we don't say that. We don't say that. I was like, oh, what if you're saying, like, I'm happy that you love me? He's like, we don't say that. So it's like, just be cautious. But I said, could you say Khatisechenke? He's like, okay, that's fine.
You love me.
You love us.
Has isechan.
We're not a Hus.
Ha isechan.
Ha isechan.
Yeah, oh,
Ah, isechan.
Ha isechan.
Ah, Isechan.
Ah, isechan.
Needs a little pause between those vowels. Okay, let's keep that in mind. So you love people. Now we are going to have contraction. Type of contraction we're going to get is vowel blending. So
Vowel
p
blending.
and I are going to give us, what do you think? Any Predictions?
Key.
Eh?
Key.
E. Yes.
Eh.
Kisechan.
Kiesechan.
Kiesechan.
Kisechan.
Kiesechan.
Kisechan.
Kiesechan.
Kiesechan.
Kisechan.
Okay.
Kies.
Coming back to here. So we just looked at that, right? So we would have, okay. So you would say hot, good, and you would, okay. Any different example? Okay. So you would say shtu yidle tu, right? So this this is the I, this is you. You studied. But you would say shtu ich tu, and you would say shtu gaklich tu. So I'm showing you this because just like tu, what was the rule for tu and tu? Anybody want to recap these damn rules?
Depends on whether there's a vowel in the classifier.
Yes. So the vowel is short. Unless there's no vowel in the classifier, then it's long. That exact same rule applies to it. It is short. Unless there's no vowel in the classifier, then it will be E. It'll go long.
Ah,
What's the difference between those first two? Like, why does it become minus D in the second one?
Oh, okay, so you studied. You, whoops, are studying. So it's not complete. And you will study. Oh, these are Jedi mind tricks right here.
The Y.
You are studying. Okay. You love something.
Isfahan.
Yeah, oh, Atisachan.
Isachan.
Atisachan.
Isachan.
What's going to happen when we switch from you to y'all?
Ball.
Kat Isechan.
It's going to be yeah.
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 Kiesechan.
Yisachan.
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 Yesechan.
Yisachan.
Kiesechan.
You love them all.
Has yisechan.
Has
Isfahan.
Yisachan.
Asiesechan.
Hasisachan.
Hasyasachan.
Hasisachan.
You all love me. More
Hasyasachan.
tricks. More tricks. You all love me.
Ha Isfahan. Isfahan.
Kat Yesechan.
Kat Isechan.
Chat yisachan.
Hasisachan.
Kat
You
Yesechan.
all love us.
Ha Isachan.
Ha Yesechan.
Hayasachan.
Isechan.
Hasisachan.
Ha
Isfahan.
Yesechan.
Hayasachan.
Ha Isachan.
Hasisachan.
Ha Yesechan.
You all love people.
Yesechan.
Isfahan.
Yisachan.
Kuyisfahan.
Yisachan.
Kuyisachan.
Oh, because you drop the vowel, so it goes E, right? Okay, yeah. Oh no, the vowel's still there.
No.
The vowel is there. He distinctively said, like this is one I thought it would stay short. And maybe if I asked other speakers, they might say Kuyisachan. But when I listened, he said Kuyisachan. I heard it go long. This one does not really go, it doesn't go long. Like I don't see it going long. You could apply all those vowel, no vowel type of experiments, and it should stay yeah all the time. It just likes to be yeah. But that's what I heard him say. But I don't know. Maybe I'd have to listen to it again and see. That's what I heard him say. Y'all love something.
All of something. At Yisakhan.
Yisichan.
Yisakhan.
At Yisachan.
At Yisakhan.
Now we switch to the third person. Something big is going to change. What is the big thing that's going to change?
Asichan.
Ye'oweh. So if you have third
Yeah.
person subject, third person object, it's got to be They love them. Asachan.
Asakhan.
Asachan.
Asichan.
Asachan. Asachan.
Asichan.
So Shingit can do an awful lot of things.
Asichan.
But one thing that Shingit can't really do with just its grammar is distinguish between whether you're pluralizing the object, the subject, or both when they're both third person. So this one can be they love them all, they all love them, or they all love them all. So you have to take care of it outside of the verb. There's different ways to do it. But how would you say any of those three things? Hasasachan.
Asichan.
Asachan.
Asasakhan.
Hasasachan.
Asasakhan.
Hasasachan.
Asakhan.
Asasakhan.
So coming back, has is a preverb, not an object pronoun. So this is something I have to remind myself all the time. Has, chat. That is the order it's going to go in. If you're anything like me, you'll catch yourself saying chat, has. It's just something I think that does happen, right? So gotta catch up. Okay, they love. So this is just a singular they. We're gonna get to the they all. They love me.
Asasakhan.
Asichan.
Asachan.
Asasakhan.
Chatzechan.
Asasakhan.
Chatzechan.
Asachan.
You just
Asichan.
saying it again. Why? No subject.
The third person subject is always and forever unmarked. And our English brain is going to have a real hard time with that. We're going to want to put de, or we're just going to want to put something in there. But the third person subject is always unmarked. So even here, the only thing marked is the object. So here, once the object changes to chat, we have nothing there. And it's just wild. It's just wild. And so that's just how Tlingit works. It's like if you just spoke English and you never used a subject pronoun for a third person, it'd just be wild, right? So you'd say, I did it, you did it, did it. That's just how it would function. But in Tlingit, it works. They love us.
Asakhan.
Yeah, well. Hasachan.
Asichan.
Hasachan.
Asachan.
Asichan.
Hasachan.
They love you.
Isichan.
Isachan.
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 Isichan.
Does anybody remember how to say
Isachan.
you love them?
Asakhan.
Isachan.
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 If it's an imperfective, Tlingit also cannot, just by its sounds alone, distinguish between, because if you said that, it'd be like, wait, do they love you? Or do you love them? It's the Tlingit soap opera. I need to know. But you would just,
Or is it both at the same time?
right? I
Maybe
hope
wish.
so. That sounds like a happy ending. But so like, you would take care of that stuff outside of the verb. So I would say, what H away, isachan. Has, or I would say, hooch away, isachan. So you can use an ergative marker. There's There's different ways you can do it, but just know that grammatically there are some limits in Tlingit, even though it sure does an awful lot.
The Barney song just came in my head. It was like, he's gonna give us homework. Translate Barney.
There you go.
It's like, I love you.
Just go listen to that song like 100 times.
Now I've got it stuck in my head.
You know?
Chaserchan, we're happy. Okay. They love you all.
Yisechan.
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 They love people.
If you left for a space,
Kusachan. Kusachan.
Yisechan.
like, yeah,
Yisechan.
Yisechan versus Yisechan, would that make it more clear?
Isachan. Yisechan.
Or like between, like
a pause.
yeah, like
Yisechan.
Yisechan versus Yisechan.
Generally don't pause though. You say Isachan, Yisachan.
Or they make it easier.
Just listen for that. You know, and again, right? There's probably like a comedy of errors type of play that we can just write with like, oh, I thought you said you love them. You love them all. Oh my goodness, right? So, and then hilarity ensues. Okay. They love people.
Kusachan.
Kusachan.
Kusachan. Kusachan.
Kusachan.
Kusachan.
Kusachan.
Atsachan.
Atzechan.
Yisechan.
So for the first time this evening, it's going to get a little complicated. They all love me.
They all. There's a word for they all. Is it uha?
That's hus.
Yisechan.
Atzachan.
Chatzchan.
In the grammar, the hus is like it's like Neptune. It's way out there, right? So the objects always go inside of it. It's just something good to remember.
Probably be fine
Because you will, when you start speaking Tlingit, you will start using these things. Like the more you speak, you'll eventually say, oh yeah, they all saw me there. Those guys saw me there, right? They all love us.
Hasachan.
Has-ha-sachan.
Hasechan.
Atzechan.
Yisechan.
They all love you.
Hasisachan.
Yisechan.
Has-isachan.
Atzechan.
Yisechan.
They all love. What did I have to? I'm missing one, am I? Okay, they all love you all.
They all love you.
Yisechan.
Yisechan.
Hasisachan.
Yisechan.
Has-yisachan.
Yisechan.
I missed one. Okay, interesting. They all love people.
Haskusachan.
Has-kusachan.
Yisechan.
Has-kusachan.
Yisechan.
They all love something.
Atzechan.
Has-atzachan.
Yisechan.
Has-atzachan.
Yisechan.
Yisechan.
Let's see. So, in English, we might have some subject-verb agreement issues, but it doesn't matter. When we switch to being loved, like to say, I am loved, you are loved, they are loved, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen? What's the thing that's going to happen to help us do that?
It loves us, maybe?
Duh,
We're
which
gonna-
is going to push it plus D, doesn't it?
That is correct.
Yeah.
So they are
Yisechan.
loved, or it is loved. So now the
Yisechan.
object will be 0 now.
Oh, just Yisechan.
Dutzachan.
Dusachan. Dudzachan.
Dutzachan.
Yisechan.
Yisechan.
They all are loved.
Yisechan.
Yisechan.
Dutzachan. I am loved.
Haduzahan.
We are loved.
Haduzahan.
You are loved.
Iduzahan.
Haduzahan.
Y'all are loved.
Yiduzahan.
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 People are loved.
Kudzahan.
Haduzahan.
We're gonna have
Haduzahan.
Kudzahan.
Kuduzahan.
Is that no?
Something is loved.
So do can
does
never lose a
do
vowel
also
then.
not contract?
Yeah, do like that. No, it cannot. It will never contract.
You couldn't, could you? Because it'd be it'd be did you couldn't.
You couldn't do it.
Adding that to my list.
Okay. Something is loved.
Haduzahan.
Haduzahan.
Okay, we've loved everything. We've loved all the ways that we can love. Good job. Okay. And like, so keep, like, review this list, go back through it. If you look at Hausanecha Yuchatangi, and if you look at this whole presentation, it does introduce some other verbs to start pushing through this. But like, then you have to go back into the stories and go back into like speeches and listening to Tlingit and listening to how people talk, and you'll catch how they're using these. But your ear will start to tune into these things now. So you're like, oh, okay, well, they're saying you, it's you something, right? So now, in the time that we have left, we're going to introduce a couple other concepts, like what happens when you put a verb into a perfective? What happens when you put a verb into the future? Those are the two we're going to spend some time looking at, and by the end of next semester, I will expect you to look at any verb and be able to put it into the future or the perfective. And I will hope you can also put any subject and object combination in there, right? So there's moving parts, and it's complicated, but there's only so many parts that are there, right? So thinking of this, oh, is there a question? So coming back to this, like, so this, it's like a board game idea someday, but it's really just like a tool to help you like start conjugating and start thinking about how the verb starts affecting, like, the question is like, what kinds of things need to be activated? Then how do those things now interact? Because what's going to happen is we just did object, subject, right? A whole bunch of like, just saw what happens when you start changing them. That's only for an imperfective. If we're going to do perfective, something is going to pop up in between those two. If we're going to do future, three things are going to pop up in between those two. Now things have to contract, okay? So looking at this, there is a handout that's not done. Maybe this is the month where I finish all the things. But I'll put the draft up so you can see it. So what this handbook does is it'll go through all of these green things here and tell you what they mean and what they do. This isn't all of the preverbs, but these are the most common ones. Like, I think you need to know these ones in order to be able to just use the language. These are all the object pronouns. There's a new one on here. Which one's new to the party?
Ush.
Hush.
And what is ush? Anybody know?
Like the
It's
subject, the main character, the person we've been talking about.
Yeah, that person we've been talking about, that main character. So then it'll go through, and we know all of these, but we just have to keep using them to keep sort of getting that association into our mind. Ha is us, ye is y'all, and just getting those things down. The thematic, each of these have meaning, although one of them probably has more function than meaning. The conjugation prefix, we'll talk about how they work, but like the sort of shortcut is like these appear in certain combinations to move the verb into different modes. Okay, that's going to be the whole answer. It's like, which one of these needs to be activated to put the verb into this mode? And then what kinds of things, and then it triggers like a series of events that'll happen. Here's all the subjects. We know them all. There's no more subjects than these. That's all of them in Lingi. Here's the classifier. These on the left are there, and especially the top left is the natural state. 0, sa, shla, sha. Those are the 4 Lingi classifiers. You can modify them by adding the I component or adding the D component or both. Okay? The stem we will talk about, but all this like little formulaic stuff is going to help you just to predict, is it going to be short and high, long and high, or long and low? And we'll see that in some cases, it's extremely predictable. We'll deal with suffixes and postverbs later. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to put a verb into the perfective, what do you need to do on this game board? Grab the y, put it on there. That has to be in the prefix now. Y has to be in. That is the perfective marker. For the perfective, once that marker gets put in there, now we're saying, okay, let's talk about this verb strictly in terms of whether or not it has happened. Okay, has it already happened? That's what the perfective wants to know. So now, if it's a positive perfective, it must be a plus I classifier. So now our classifiers have to be ya, di, si, zi, shle, gle, shi, or j. And the theme tells us that. Like for love, if it's an S classifier, it's got to be si. If it's a 0 classifier, like to be, it's got to be ya. It has to be. Because it's a perfective, you don't get a pick. It's just, that's what the classifier does. It says, yes, it happened. So the classifier must go plus I to show that it did happen, right? Because the plus I means it happened or became that way, or it potentially will. For the stem variation, you have 4 options. This is how it goes. If the verb is open, if it ends with a vowel, all the 0 conjugation verbs will be long and high in the perfective. All of them. Hua, cha, because it's 0. If it's na, ga, or qa, it will be long and low. Hua, ta, because that's na conjugation. For closed, the 0s will be short and high. Kauche, hit, because that's 0. For the others, they will be long and low. Ade huagut. It is very predictable. The only thing with this one is if the theme is marked high, it will not go low. So it's like, here's the rule, but it can override it by a stem that says, I don't go low. Like for example, to say, I caught it, you would expect it to be hua shot, because it's g conjugation. But it's actually hua shot, because that stem does not go low. Any questions about any of that?
Did I hear that correctly? It's long and high for that example?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
But the rule is basically it'll be long and low if it's not a 0, and if it's closed. But if the stem says I don't go low, then you just keep it high. It's going to be long and high.
So like the one we just did, hun, that says I don't go low, right? Because it's high and yeah.
For hun, you can ignore all of this stuff.
Okay, never mind.
I'm your favorite verb stem.
Okay.
Yes, and some of them there's not very many that are like that. But like to paint, ni guat, it's always ni guat, it never changes. Juan Niguat, I painted it. Okay. And we'll look at some like this stuff. It's very abstract, but when we start to move through examples and we start to look at that theme, we'll say, okay, I know everything that it's going to do. I just could figure that out, right? So a perfective negative, what happens? Well, now you got to throw klesh in the preverb. That's got to be there. Now the irialis gets added to the conjugation, but usually they just sort of smush together. But now the classifier has to be, it goes back to its minus I form, or it stays in its minus I form. So it's got to be 0, da, sa, s, sha, sha, or sh. Those are your only options. That's what the classifier has to be. For the stem, all open stems that are 0 will be short and high. Because that's a 0. Chwasaku, it's long and high because it's a 0. Everything else, keshwata, I didn't sleep. So na, ga, and qa, if they're open, in the negative perfective, they will always be long and low. All the closed ones, all of them, doesn't matter, 0, na, ga, qa, they all want to be long and low. Unless there's no low version, then it will stay high.
What about, okay, back to the one we just did, like hun, since it's negative, like if I say I don't love you, would it be clef? Like you dropped the I because it didn't happen? I don't love you, so it didn't happen, right? So it'd be like S-X-A-N. Like you drop the, oh, it'd be a sa, okay. Sa. All right.
So when any of them are negative, if anything is negative, it always has to be minus I.
Minus I. Okay.
Cannot be plus I if it's negative.
Can't be plus I and it can't be neutral. It's got to be minus. Okay.
Yep. It's got to stay minus I.
Okay.
All the futures must also be minus I. Every positive future, negative future, because even if you say it's gonna happen, it has not happened. Right? So the classifier in this case is like, it's got a little bit of anxiety, right? Like you say, it's gonna be okay. They say, but it's not okay right now, so I gotta stay minus I, right? So but there's a logic to all of that. It goes plus I to say, yep, that verb happened. So even you say it's gonna happen, it hasn't happened yet. So for this, you're gonna have ga, and qa every time. Those three things, and it's this one, and that one specifically. And it's important because they go in a certain order. But that means you've already got three things in there. So once you start adding objects and subjects, there has to be contraction now. For here, easy. Long and high every time. Don't care what it, like, futures are great because the positive future is long and high. So you got these three things. You've got a minus I classifier every single time. There is this other complicated thing. If the verb is ga conjugation, the future must always have k in front of it. If it's qa, it must always have ye, which is why we say tsu ye ikqasatin. The ye is there and it goes long and high at the end, just like we expect it to. The future, it has the most stuff in it. Well, it has a lot of stuff in it, maybe not the most, but it's also the most predictable. Because you don't have to worry about 0, na, ga for the stem variation. But you do have to remember it for kekwak e. It's going to get better. Ye aguchtagan. It's going to sunshine. Well, this is Juno, so maybe it's keshsu ye aguchtagan. It's not going to sunshine again. Sorry, okay. So the future negative, you add klesh, and it goes long and low. Other than that, everything else is the same, right? So, kahisiku. Y'all are going to know it. Keshkahisiku. Y'all aren't going to know it. I'll stick with the first one. Any questions about any of that stuff? So we've got it in this visual. And here's a different way to look at it. Like I just think about like, maybe if I keep making pictures, it'll all make sense. So I made this a few years ago, just trying to think of like, well, in my brain, it's like you're turning switches on, right? So to have a perfective, you need to activate the perfective mode, which is right here. So the light turns on, turn the switch from off to perfective. Bing, and now you've got this y that gets activated. You could add the subject. You could select the classifier group. If it's a positive perfective, it also needs to go plus I. It's just a different way to look at it. This will all be up there if you want to sort of look at it more. For the future, you might need a preverb. So here, if it's ga or qa, you need to have a preverb there. K and ye. The other thing is you need to have ga activated, the irialis activated, and the qa mode activated. Ga, qa. Classifier has to stay minus I. Everybody okay?
Yeah, making more sense all the time. It does really. Like every time, it's like something else clicks. You may forget a little bit, but then it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. You know.
Yeah, it's like filling up a pantry that has slanted shelves. Like some things fall down, and it's like, okay, well, we'll keep putting more. Okay. Almost all of the verb modes are just minus I. So as we learn more verb modes and what that means and how that affects the verb, just remember the classifier usually stays the same. We change the classifier to say, oh, state imperfective. Well, if it is that way, then it's got to be plus I. That makes sense. Perfective, if it happened, it's got to be plus I. There is this repetitive state imperfective, which is rare, but most of the repetitives are minus I. But there is one where you say like you, I, ya, tunk. So you're hearing that ya right there, the plus I one. Okay? All right. So stem variation. We got to talk stem variation. We're almost out of time. The theme marks the stem variation for you. So there's open, fading, closed, volatilized, and ejective, and invariable. Those are the types of stems that are in Tlingit. Fading is marked with a little h. That means in repetitive modes, it'll stay low. The other ones will go high. Glottalized and ejective, it doesn't matter if you remember those terms. The only thing that you got to remember is if it's marked high, see this little tone mark? It's right here, shot. It won't go low. Invariable is this little x, it means it stays the same. So we'll learn, like as we read a theme, so one of the things we do is we look at this and we say, okay, this verb is ye, ya, subject, 0 classifier, ka. It means for the subject to say a certain thing. Ye, ya, wa, ka. It's going to be long and low. They said this. Ye, ya, kwa, ka. I am going to say this. This is for something to be. This is the yati verb. Like in beginning Tlingit, we learned this. So say yeyati, yachyati, A'atine khatyati. This is na conjugation. Don't worry about fading right now. I don't think you need to worry about that. The only thing you need to worry about is if it's marked high, it won't go low. So then we learn how to read these things so that it makes more sense. Again, like here's another way to look at it. What is a perfective? So for a perfective, 0 opens are long and high, na, ka, and qa are long and low. And what we're going to do next semester is we're going to go through a whole bunch of examples. We're going to have to balance that with listening to Tlingit, speaking Tlingit, or else we just get stuck in this thing where we're constantly analyzing the language and thinking about it from the perspective of like, how is this different from English? How is this different from that? What is this thing going to do? But then we're always going to be thinking about it. We need to get into this mode where we're speaking it and receiving it. And then all of this information is like helping us to understand it and to predict what it's going to be. So the last thing, I'll jump ahead, is thinking about what is the prefix going to look like. So when you're dealing with a prefix for a perfective, if there's no thematic prefix, this is all of your options. This is all of them. So for example, if we know it's an S classifier, like to know something, that's a 0 conjugation S classifier, so it's going to be long and high. Chosaku, utusaku, yisaku, yisaku, ausaku, wadudzaku. Now we can use that verb in like changing the subject all those different ways. I could take another verb. So there's an L classifier with teen, which means to watch something. Okay, so like I watched somebody's cat. I was cat sitting for them. So that's a 0 and it's closed, so it's going to be tin. Chwashatin, watushatin, yishatin, yishatin, aushatin, wadutlatin. Let's see. Jumped around. So it's going to start with ut. It's going to be na conjugation, and it's going to be plus d. Ut chwajakain, ut watujakain, ut yijakain, ut wujakain. We're not going to use the fourth person right now. So like what you'll learn is that as you're learning how to put these prefixes together, you'll have these things which can be cheat sheets. You say, okay, the prefix is fairly predictable, and now I need to just learn what's the stem variation going to be. For example, there's a S classifier, teen, to see something, right? So we say, oh, chosatin, I saw it. Wutusatin, yisatin, yisatin, ausatin, wadudzatin. And then there's another list that shows, these are negative perfectives. Okay, I guess we do the future later. Maybe that's enough for now. That's probably enough for now. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
This looks like it has just about everything in it.
Yeah, so like,
So if we can master this, we can understand and learn everything we need to know.
yeah, so like we just did, so for example, so what we're going to do next semester is we're going to start with this. Say, okay, everything we need to know is given to us in the theme. This is a 0 verb. It's closed. It likes to stay high. But in the perfective as a 0, we expect it to be short and high. It has an object. The only thing we're going to change through this verb is the object. So we're going to have, if we look up here, it gives us the sort of the cheat sheet. object, perfective marker, ch, classifier, ch'ech. So we should say, I am dirty. I should expect chat wuchechech. That's exactly what it is. But so now if I start changing that object, I'm going to get ilchechech, wuchechech, you or hauchechech, yuchechech, haswuchechech, and kuchechech. So there's more pieces in there, right? So you see chat, yu, sh, I, yu, sh. So in this case, something has to go. And when something goes, it'll drop this vowel, and this will turn just to a W. For inland speakers, it also shows you when you're going to use the M. Later, there's a rule for that, but we've probably done enough rules at this point. But I will put this entire slideshow up so you could study it. There's no guesswork involved. It's just like, it's really comes down to memorizing what these prefixes are going to be until you can build them yourself. And then once you can build them yourself and then predict the stem, you could use any verb you want to. Like it really opens everything up. But the key, I think, is looking at this stuff and then putting it into practice. For a long time, that's been the missing element for Shengit, is who do we talk to? Where do we practice this stuff? Let's write, don't do it now, but let's write 10 sentences with perfective verbs, right? And so as you look them up, you can also go into, as you sort of like test some of these rules, you can also test how well you're understanding them by going to the verb database, which isn't open. Okay, hold on. Okay, there it is. So we can go into the verb database, which is, so we can go in here and we'll say, okay, ta is 0. I expect it to be long and high in the perfective. We go down and we got chwaseta. It's long and high in the perfective. It's se. And once you learn how this works, chwaseta, chwaseku, that prefix is exactly the same on those verbs. And then, like I'm pushing too hard. But one last thing I'll say. When we get to these things, like so there's 0 in everything else. This is a very common pattern in Tlingit. So these zeros, we got to kind of remember what these are. But when we go to everything else, like look at this, we got chwase, chwashe, chwashe. If you look at all of these ones right here, all of these ones, there's a single thing that changes in them, and that's the same consonant that's in the classifier. S, DZ, L, DL, SH, J. Everything around it is exactly the same. So, wusse, wudze, wushe, wudle, wushe, wudje. So it's pattern building and memorizing, but you will reach a point. You will, if you stick with it and really like push yourself beyond like what we've been doing so far. But we're taking a break, which will be nice. You'll look at all of this stuff and you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember when I had to just like memorize those. Like now I know how they work. It's gonna happen. Atling gonna cheese to cut you on. Yiku ayach one. One kanins a day o a dati tuchtani ya ha you katangi. Joy at the cut ya singitani a kauduzagan. Ohan ka'a. Yis hit gach to yech. Ya hit haslil ko has just shaguni teen. Akawe hayetki. Kesh na haska kwati. Ya haslil ko has to in haska kuchsati. A joey kedena ya adati jekach tune. Atlen hit gach to yech. ya hayukatangi tin kahaye jini. Kashdasa tin ayayeka kwati. Just uhan. Yande. Atata yakatinak ya hayukatangi. Ya hashish kohas to jis hadachan just yejene, anaya yagatitlak. Kesh. Gwash yidet shidzi. Kesh kegach shidzi ko agwash. Just kunacho ekayi ako. Et just the cut yagi. Aka yende yayan yitlak. So the way I think about it is doing this work. Sometimes I feel like all the Tlingit villages got burned down. Like they just all got burned down. But we're building houses so that the future generations of Tlingit peoples won't be alone, won't be cold, won't be isolated. So it is hard work. There's no way around the hard work that it takes to learn Tlingit and to use it. But just knowing like we're the ones who are standing up for this language. That means we could take a break, but you can't take too long of a break because like this has to just become your life. But then what you will find, like David Katzig used to say this all the time. He's like, if you think Tlingit is hard, try living in a world where Tlingit doesn't exist. If you just keep going, keep speaking, keep listening, it reaches a point where it's not hard. Like it does start to flow, but you got to have all these mechanical pieces. It's like you're like this little robot putting these things together, but eventually it naturalizes, and it does happen. Like there's people I can talk to right now who didn't know how to talk before, right? It's really exciting. And like, however you approach this kind of stuff, like you don't have to master every single thing there. For some people, that's like, okay, I just need to know this is gonna be a chwase, this, whatever level you need to, but there's these little parts that are moving and your mind will figure so much of this stuff out. But for me, I think the part that's really interesting whenever we hit this phase of learning, because I take groups of people to this level, to this level, to this level, is you'll get a point where your English brain is going to have to just let go of some stuff and say, I don't know anymore. That Tlingit brain over there is doing a bunch of wild stuff, and now it's just cranking things out. But like to live with these dual consciousness, it's very fun, but it's sometimes disorienting. But like all this stuff, it will eventually make sense. So good chish. Send me your letters if you want me to look at them. I'm happy to look at them, and I know some of you have sent me stuff and I haven't sent you comments yet, but I will. And they don't have to be perfect either. They just have to be, you're just communicating a thing with each other and celebrating the good work that you folks have done.
Have you looked at the one that I sent you yet?
Yes, I have, but I need to send you comments on it. So.
Is it good?
That's good. Ganachish Yuhan, Wukecha.
Ganalchish. Atlen ganalchish.
Huge afterthought.
Ah, yeah, click T. Pat yourselves on the back.